In the first video of this series, I talked about the fact that I've had quite a lot of problems in my life, and recently it almost feels as though the world is ganging up against me. And so it's made me think a bit about the question of good and evil, even though to me it is not strictly a magical question so much as a political or religious one. And yet it impacts all aspects of life, and therefore it's fair enough for me to want to say something about it. And what I thought I would do, what I said I would do, is to give 3 short videos on 3 ways that I have myself addressed this question. Now, I'm not claiming that these are solutions, it's just ways of thinking about it which have helped me sometimes and might help other people. And the first one I call the binary approach. This is the one that accepts that religious, political idea that there is good and there is evil, and never the twain shall meet. Now, I say it's political because it's typified by those politicians who say, if you're not with us, you're against us. In other words, there's no sitting on the fence. Either you're with us, you're good, or you're against us, you're evil. It's a very absolute position. So, what I'm faced with is a good and an evil. So what about the third thing, me? No, there isn't a third thing, because there are only good and evil. So I must be one or the other. Now the normal thing, the assumption is, well, I'm good, of course. And so here's me in the good, and out there's that evil. And then, of course, the very attractive, simple thing to do is to get rid of that evil. Exorcise it, banish it, kill it, destroy it, cut it off. And it's a very attractive, simple sort of formula, that. Except that almost the entire history of humankind has been a continuous disaster of that formula going wrong. So the question is, why does it go wrong? Now, in answer to that, or looking for an answer for that, I look to the mother of all binary systems, Yin-yang, and this wonderful diagram. And it partly explains what goes wrong to me. Because the attractive thing to do is to say, well, okay, let's get rid of the black and we'll be all white and lovely. There. Got rid of the black, and what's left is white. Of course, it doesn't look white because it's me through it. But anyway, you see what I mean. But of course, that shows the problem, because there's that little speck of black left. And it's very powerful because it's like a seed. Now you might say, yeah, but you don't have to have that, do you? You do actually, because yang can't exist without that speck of yin. Yang is meaningless without some yin to define itself against. Pure snow whiteness is blinding, it's invisible. It's only if there's something black there to show that it is white. Otherwise it sort of vanishes. It's actually reflecting a very profound truth, that speck. And as a gardener, the truth of this is all too apparent, because you can come into a plot in autumn and you can see a mass of weeds, and you think, okay, what I'm going to do is to cut down all those weeds and burn them, and then I'll have a nice clean plot next year. You do that and it's disastrous. Next year it's solid weeds. Why? Because in cutting them down, you've scattered the seeds. You've scattered those little dots of the other colour, and they all spring up. And they're powerful, those seeds, because they've got the whole of life in them. They're more powerful than the dead plants you've got rid of. And that is sort of illustrates this problem. why it is actually very profoundly so. You have to make allowance for that seed. Now, example I gave, which will come up again in the next video, in The Good, the Bad, the Funny, is I said, take the example of a magnet. Imagine this as a magnet, and we all know that magnets have a north pole and a south pole. So let's decide that the south pole is evil. Simple. We just cut it in half and get rid of that south pole. Now, anyone who's done school magnetism knows the problem there is that this here now is the south pole, and that's still the north pole. Okay, well, you're going to do it again. You're going to cut that south pole off, and there's your north pole, but this is now a south pole. You can't get rid of it. It gets, not only you can't get rid of it, it's getting closer and closer. Now, this to me was epitome of what happened in the post-war Cold War, after the Second World War. It was so clear-cut, you know, there's the good is, the capitalists in America and Europe and that, and there's the bad is, the Soviet Empire, communist. So you cut off relations with the Soviet Empire, and you've got rid of that evil. It's out there now. And then you discover that, well, Italy's got a communist party, and even good old dependable ally Britain, you get Burgess and Maclean, the people who turn out to be spies for the Russians, because they were communist sympathizers. You can't trust the Europeans. No. Cut them off too. Just stick to America. And then you discover that even in America there are communist sympathizers. Oh my God, you get McCarthyism. You know, you get all the sort of witch hunt that takes place. And that leads to this paranoia, which they used to call Reds under the bed. You know, you can't get rid of them. They're everywhere. And so you see, it's like that magnet. It's getting, not only are you not getting rid of them, it's getting closer and closer and closer and more threatening. So, how does this help? Well, it helps because it reminds you that for all the simplicity of the binary model, black versus white, you can't just get rid of one side of it. You have to think a bit harder, because there's always a speck, a seed of the other in both sides. Now, take a very sort of, most people, a black and white thing where there's absolutely no ambiguity. There's a terrorist in your country and he's got one of these exploding vests and he's planning to go into a really crowded place where there's many people, preferably women and children too, so he can blow it up and kill as many people as possible. What could be more blatantly evil than that? But according to this, be careful, because that person is a human, so he cannot actually be 100% evil, because humans are not archetypes, they are human. So what could be the good in that person? Now, I don't know what, but typically that person might actually have a family back home for whom he's a very loved family member. He may be a good father or a good brother who buys presents. He may be a loving uncle who bounces the children on his knee and all that sort of thing. It just happens to hate the West. So what seems like a very simple thing, there he's in your targets, you pull the trigger and kill this evil person. Back home, what you've done is killed a loving father, a dear family member. And as far as they're concerned, they hate you for that. And so, out of the one person you've killed, there's now a whole family who absolutely detests you, is burning for revenge. There'll be a new generation all detesting you, hating you, and wanting to destroy you. It's like that seed, you see, sprouted sprouted. Try to find another, surely a black and white example. Smallpox. We want to eliminate smallpox. What could be worse? I mean, it's evil, it kills people. There's no good in it at all. Except that smallpox taught humanity a lot. If it wasn't for smallpox, well, smallpox taught people about vaccination, the need for it and how to do it. Smallpox has been a great teacher for mankind. And although it might seem very attractive just to eliminate it once and for all, I bet, and I'm almost 99% certain, that somewhere there is a scientific laboratory which has got samples of smallpox stored away for future education, because even if it's eliminated, there may be other diseases cropping up where we can only learn how they work by studying smallpox. You just don't wipe something out like that. You have to remember that even in the most blatantly evil thing, there must be some seed of goodness in there, otherwise it couldn't really exist. And it works the other way too. Let's say you're a liberation fighter and you've been fighting the oppressors, this great evil, and at last the revolution is over and you've won. All the people around you have fought with you. They're your good comrades. And so you establish a government and you put them all in positions of power. Because you know they're good people. They fought with you against the oppressor. And yet, have you ever known a revolution that hasn't gone sour when it comes into power? A revolutionary movement that hasn't eventually corrupted, whether it's Stalinism after the Russian Revolution, whether it's Nazism, which liberated Germany from its oppression, or whether it's in South Africa, it's the ANC, which is now turning very corrupt. It always happens. You see, it's inevitable. When you're fighting with a liberation fighter, your comrade is fighting passionately with you. You know him as a trustworthy, reliable, hard-working person dedicated to overthrowing that oppressor. But what you don't know is, deep inside him, what is the seed that is powering him? Is it, like yourself, a love of humanity, a desire to do well and to do good and make the world a better place? Or is there also an element of envy? He actually wants what the oppressor's got. And when he's defeated the oppressor, he's going to make sure he grabs as much of it as possible. Or is it actually a love of fighting? Is he just really a psychopath who wants to kill people and is delighted that this struggle has given him an excuse to be a killer, to justify it? You don't actually know what that core seed is in the person until the struggle is over and they fall on fertile ground and those seeds spring up, and then you discover some nasty facts about the people you've been working with, and you may be one of them. So that's what I'm proposing in this, that it's not a solution, it doesn't give you an answer, it's something that needs to be thought about. Faced with apparently black and white problem, where all you have to do is to get rid of the evil, it's necessary to think that what is the good in that? Because if you don't uproot the good in that and address it, you're simply scattering the seeds for the next wave of evil. And yeah, that's really what I'm saying. One thing I have to address is why it's so fundamental, this black and white. As it so obviously doesn't work, why do people keep falling back on it? But I'll have to address that in the next video.